This is part 13, Word Magic Exposed. Now, this is kind of an unusual slide to see here. This is former President Bill Clinton playing on the, looks like the Arsenio Hall show or the Tonight Show. He's playing the saxophone. Originally, I wanted to call this part the Funky Technician, and you'll see why here in a little bit. This part of the presentation, we're going to explore some of the ambiguity in language that's been exposed publicly by high-level rhetoricians, high-level politicians. I'm using Bill Clinton specifically throughout this part because I think his some of his wiggly language that he's used in the national spotlight is just so special, and it's so unique and so strange. It's also just it really shows an example of how and why language really isn't primary, but the intention or the spirit behind the language, of course, is primary, and language is secondary. And I'll explain what this actually means when we start looking at some of these Billisms, because there is quite a treasure trove of Billisms here to explore. Now, this isn't anything political, but it is what it is. Bill Clinton had some very awkward, strange moments when it comes to language, as I think a lot of us know, but we're going to explore those in detail and look at exactly what about these things, what about some of these Billisms gives us such a great example for understanding some of the ambiguity with language and how it can be used, of course, in a way to manipulate people, in a way to as a form of word magic or word sorcery, if you like. Okay. So Bill Clinton used his expert knowledge of language and the law in an attempt to use linguistic ambiguities and play with semantics in order to wiggle his way out of an impeachment, right? He attempted to be both truthful and not admit his wrongdoing at the very same time, right? Sort of like that, the quantum exclusion theory, right? Or the double slit experiment, right? Is it a wave? Is it a particle? Is it both, right? Bill Clinton is trying to do this quantum mechanical game. He's trying to be both things at the exact same moment, right? And all the while he's trying to do this strange, bizarre double speak sort of thing going on, all the while he's trying to maintain his image as a calm and relatable leader. And considering the pressure that he endured, he did surprisingly well. Now, the questioning of Bill Clinton aired on national TV during the Monica Lewinsky scandal, and it laid bare how the mind of a lawyer works when backed into a corner by objective facts. So let's take a look at the technical nature of how Clinton tried to weasel his way out of his predicament, as it reveals some important truths about the inner workings of word magic. So here's the first example. Now, this is a very famous quote from Bill Clinton that aired on national TV, right? And he's quoted as saying, "I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky," right? Now, if you look at that statement, the definition of sexual relations refers specifically to intercourse, okay? But Clinton and his attorneys were banking on this carefully chosen term, this term sexual relations, to be assumed by the viewing public as a blanket statement to be interpreted as any kind of sexual activity, right? Without looking this term up, if someone uses the term sexual relations, you're probably going to be thinking this has some kind of sexual contact, right? You're thinking it's a blanket term for any kind of sexual contact, right? I do not have sexual relations, right? But that actually means sexual intercourse specifically, right? So this is a very wiggly use of language, right? Very weaselly thing to do, of course. It's truthful, right? But of course, he's preying on the fact that most people would interpret sexual relations as just meaning a blanket term for all kinds of sexual contact, even though legally, and that's the only definition that counts, is at least the only definition that counts to Bill Clinton is sexual intercourse, right? So he's making a truthful statement while being misleading at the same time. So Clinton's technically being truthful with this specific statement at the press conference in 1998. It was the intention behind his carefully crafted words which proved him to be untruthful. A cunning and carefully crafted attempt at linguistic manipulation, which of course backfired. Clinton was trying to have his cake and eat it too, in a manner of speaking. Now, this event on television remains one of the best examples of a politician using ambiguous language to save his own skin and simultaneously mislead the public. Typically, politicians use ambiguity in language for the latter, but rarely for both in the way that Bill Clinton attempted to do. Politicians are good at leveraging word magic against an opponent or maybe some abstract government policy. However, when they find themselves in the hot seat, they need to be prepared, or the audience should be prepared, I should say, for an Inception-like feedback loop of just never-ending bullshit, right? To remain technically truthful, yet completely mislead people is quite a common tactic, yet it is rarely exposed on the political level like it was with the Monica Lewinsky and Paula Jones scandal. That's what makes this such a valuable example of word magic gone completely sideways. For another example of word magic exposed, we go back to the well, so to speak. This one here has to do with Bill Clinton being questioned by the grand jury. Okay, this is some testimony that also aired on national television, and it's an absolute treasure. It's a gem. If you study language in any capacity, if you're a college student, even if you're learning, if you've reached a certain level of, English is your second language or third language or something, and you've become fluent in language and you want to learn about some of the ambiguity in language, this is a great example for you, right? So this grand jury testimony that aired on national television exposed the technical language used by lawyers attempting to escape an outright admission of wrongdoing while also attempting to appear truthful. It's a rather awkward and cringeworthy spectacle to behold. You can find the video on YouTube of the actual questioning. It's very bizarre. But what's interesting about this is isn't something, I don't think this is something, it's my opinion, I don't think this is something Bill Clinton came up with on the fly. If he did, brilliant. But I think this is something that he and his lawyers worked on for a little while. So here's the question from the grand jury questioner. He says he asks Clinton, he says, your next statement is a completely false statement. Whether or not Mr. Bennett, now Mr. Bennett is one of Clinton's attorneys, says whether or not Mr. Bennett knew of your relationship with Miss Lewinsky, stated that, and this is his attorney stating on Clinton's behalf, he says to the grand jury, there was no sex of any kind in any manner, shape, or form with President Clinton. So he's saying that statement was an utterly false statement. Is that correct? So he's asking Bill Clinton, is this statement made by your lawyer, there was no sex of any kind in any manner, shape, or form with President Clinton. That's a false statement. Is that correct, Mr. Clinton? And Bill Clinton, hesitating, he's thinking about his answer. He responds with, it depends upon what the meaning of the word is. Okay? And Bill Clinton then goes on to explain his statement. He says, if is means is and never has been, that is not a, and then he actually stops himself from saying that is not a true statement. He says, that's one thing. If it means, maybe it's better if I do it in Bill Clinton voice. If is means is and never has been, that's one thing. If it means there is none, that was a completely true statement. So the definition of is, in this case, hinges upon past versus present tense. Clinton responds to the question by presenting two different tenses or definitions of the word is. Okay, is meaning right here and now is, or is as in sometime before, right? Or is as never has been, right? Sometime in the past, right? So it's past versus present. So he attempts to hide behind the ambiguity of language with his ridiculous response. Ever the image-conscious politician, Clinton never answers the question directly, but instead evades answering the question altogether by attempting to offer two alternatives and addressing neither of these directly. It's amazing. It's an amazing act of word magic happening. However, on the nonverbal level, of course, this evasion of an explicit admission speaks more powerfully than the words themselves. Okay? The objective truth dwells not in the words, but in the spirit of one's being, right? You get the full, when someone's telling you something, when Clinton's here on TV, those many, many years ago, he's being questioned, he's on the hot seat, he is responding. You're not just hearing the words, you're not just seeing the facial expressions, you're feeling the energy. You're looking at the eyes, the micro expressions on the face, the tone of voice. There's so many elements happening. And in language, the words being used, and language and the meaning is just one element of that. But the entire picture, if you look at the video, the entire picture is telling a different story, right? The entire visual is saying that this guy is not comfortable with his answer, and he knows what he's telling you is just some evasive horse shit, right? But being the lawyer that Bill Clinton is, he's attempting, in some bizarre part of his mind, he's thinking that this may somehow be an acceptable answer just in the terms of legalities, and he'll be able to, get away with this or whatever, right? And evade impeachment, right? So the language used by Bill Clinton gives us a little peek into his intentions of wanting to appear truthful without blatantly lying, right? Clinton accomplished neither of these. However, he did create his own brand of doublespeak. Now, I should say, I'm not a political person, and I know that talking about some of these Billisms is going to make me seem like maybe I'm some sort of conservative character or something like that. Certainly that's not the case, but it's a wonderful, if you can just separate the politics, because I know everything's politicized these days, but if we can just separate the politics for a moment and just look at the actual things that Bill Clinton said, there is definitely some literary gold to be found here. There's definitely some things worth exploring, worth looking at. So, of course, we recognize the intention behind President Clinton's words were the most important part of all of this, right? The word intention, by the way, is derived from the Latin intendere, which means to turn one's attention, to divert one's attention, right? So that's a very important word, this intention. Taking words merely at face value makes one more susceptible to spell casting, right? We all communicate as human beings primarily in a nonverbal sense anyway, right? But taking words at face value without the full picture, right, that can be very dangerous. Whereas looking at the intention of the spellcaster, the person speaking, right, trying to get all of the information, not merely the meaning of the words themselves, is exactly what a magistrate or a judge is trained to do, right? You can be, of course, a magi you, of course, are a judge of your own decision making, and you have to judge things every single day, right? You have to judge things as being truthful or not. And what do you have? What tools do you have at your disposal in order to make judgments as accurately as best you can, right? Now, most of us are intuitively aware of bullshit, right? Even though we may not be able to explicitly define it as such, being able to dissect it to the degree that we're looking at it here in these examples merely points out, yet again, that the operations of word magic really are secondary, right? There's a lot more going on than just the language, of course, right? So that's why I keep driving this point home, that you don't want to, so many people do this, and we have to, as a seeker, if you're watching my channel, you obviously are a seeker, and you're open to these, you're open to growing in your understanding of yourself and the world around you. And part of that is recognizing that if language truly is secondary, right? If words are secondary, then you want to go into the more primary experience of yourself in the world, right? So that's the point I'm driving home, is these examples in part 13 that we're looking at today are just scratch the surface, right? But they do reveal, interestingly enough, even though these are superficial revealings, they show what's behind them in a deep way, in a very paradoxical sense, right? So it's very interesting. Now, it is by someone's words, such as Bill Clinton's, that we are able to make a reasonable assessment as to the intention behind his words, or anyone's words, right? Words, actions, tone of speech, body language, facial expressions, and objective evidence are the factors we use to arrive at judgment of a statement's truthfulness, or anything being truthful, right? A large contingent of society has been telling themselves and each other that being judgmental, or even just judging, is somehow a pejorative term, right? This is simply due to the misunderstanding of what the word judgmental actually means, okay? Now, the part of, to have judgment and to be judgmental, there is a slight difference, right? But not as much as you would think. Not as much as if someone's constantly judging, that means you're constantly reviewing information to make a decision. That's essentially what that means, right? So judgmental means of, relating to, or involving judgment. It's just involving judgment. You make decisions based on your own judgment every single day. You make all kinds of decisions that are up to you, right? No one's making these decisions for you, okay? So judgment means the process of forming an opinion or evaluation by discerning and comparing evidence, okay? Those who fail to exercise good judgment often end up on YouTube, right? Hold my beer, right? That kind of thing. So there's really nothing wrong with being judgmental in light of appropriate and fair evidence, right? Presuming such evidence is direct or known to be authentic, of course, right? Technically, it wouldn't even be possible to be judgmental based solely on appearances alone. You can't look at someone and be judgmental, okay? You can't just hear 2 minutes of someone talking or hear their story and be judgmental, okay? Technically, that's not even possible. So the term judgmental is completely misused in that context when people say, well, don't be judgmental. Oh, I'm not judgmental. You know, this person's so judgmental, right? Such an action would be correctly termed as prejudice or prejudging, right? Which is to say, making a judgment about someone before having real evidence or before having a full picture, right? Like you don't know what someone's life is like until you walk a mile in their shoes, right? If you don't have the full picture, you don't have the evidence, right? Then you're judging, yes, you're being judgmental, but you're judging before, right? Because again, being judgmental presumes you have evidence. So you can't be judgmental if you don't have the evidence. Does that make sense? So you're prejudging someone, which is prejudice, right? So clearly prejudice or prejudging is ill-founded, and people do this all the time, right? So that's the actual term, is this person is prejudiced, right? This person is prejudging, right? But judgment, being judgmental or judgment itself presumes sound reasoning, right? I thought it appropriate to throw it in to this section here. I think when I was making part 13, I thought, gosh, I'm judging the hell out of Bill Clinton, aren't I? But we have correct and full evidence of everything that Bill Clinton did. So I feel as if this is a fair assessment, so I can be judgmental about Bill Clinton in good conscience because we have clear evidence, right? Here's another quote from Bill Clinton. When I was in England, I experimented with marijuana a time or two, and I didn't like it, and didn't inhale, and never tried it again. So today, with cannabis being legal in most states, this statement from President Clinton seems kind of laughable. President Clinton tried to appear relatable and at the very same time was keeping up appearances with his constituents. Ever hyper-conscious of his image, Clinton sometimes said things that attempted to appeal to everyone all at once. These classic Billisms, combined with his appetite for extramarital affairs, are what earned him the nickname Slick Willie. Clinton's charisma and ability to connect with his audience made him more relatable and trustworthy in the eyes of the average voter than any of his opponents previously could ever hope to achieve. It wasn't even close. Bill Clinton, by a mile, by a million miles, up to the point that he was elected, was the most charismatic president, at least in recent memory, and people absolutely love the guy, right, because of his charisma, right? However, as good as Bill Clinton was, Barack Obama seemingly eclipsed his predecessor, employing the same techniques of charm and presidential rhetoric, but managing to keep himself free of any major personal controversies. I'd like to say that in the British sense. Controversies, right? Managing to keep himself free of any major personal controversies while in office. It seems the student has become the teacher, right? So if you compare some of the Bill-isms to, Obama never had any Obama-isms, at least not that I know of. Maybe he made some like legitimate mistakes in speaking, which we all do sometimes, but I don't think he had any intentional Obama-isms where he tried to appeal to everyone all at once and it was just a bunch of bullshit, right? So one of the most compelling things about the Bill-isms we just looked at is that many of his wiggly statements would be right at home in a heated argument between two lovers, for example, right? Passionate, heated arguments between people that are emotionally close or emotionally distant. Maybe you're presumed to be emotionally close, but you're distant, and that's why you're arguing. But an argument between lovers, for example, is can contain a lot of let's say, irrational arguments, right? A lot of irrationalities come up, right? There's the if there's no calm, then being calm and rational kind of goes out the window, right? So there's something to be said about being calm when delivering bullshit. And when I say bullshit, I mean something irrational, or you're just trying to wiggle your way out of something, right? So it's important to be calm, but at the same time there's this middle way, because if you're delivering some bullshit, right? Let's say you're a politician and you don't have a passionate response or a passionate delivery, then it doesn't have the same impact, right? As opposed to when you deliver something with passion and conviction and you get angry, that seems to have more impact, right? Than just being calm and rational, seemingly rational. If you have a little bit of fire underneath that, what you're trying to say, that lends some more believability to it, right? So even though a person may appear calm and rational, there's something less believable about someone who lacks a passionate delivery when trying to appear convincing. And this is exactly why Bill Clinton appeared to pound his fist on the podium and stormed out of the press conference claiming he had work to do for the American people. Okay? This was the speech that he gave, not the speech I should say, but the short press briefing that he gave about the Monica Lewinsky thing, right? The sexual relations thing. He pounds it's just kind of calculated and mechanical. It doesn't really seem like he's really that upset. It was intended to drive home his upset to the audience, to drive home the message that he was sincere about what he was saying, but it was totally calculated. If you watch the video, you can see, like, I've got work to do for the American people. And then, it was completely rehearsed, right? Again, not picking on Bill Clinton, since this isn't a political discussion at all. But with his presumed level of intelligence, he should have known better than to attempt a half-hearted Jedi mind trick like that, right? So this is the end of part 13, and the lovers in the last slide, they were in a fight. Now they have made up, as you can see, and they're going for a walk. I should also say that one thing about relaying an argument or having an argument in general is that I've heard it said that a good argument does not determine who is right. A good argument determines what is true. And so maybe you can argue in a way that moves you towards the truth. You may not, there's a lot of, if you have any interest in learning how, if you want to learn the 7 liberal arts, or at least learn the trivium, one part of learning the trivium, one part of learning this classical education method on how to learn better and how to think, is how to argue. It's how to argue better, how to debate, right? And what happens with most people that aren't classically trained in argument is they'll use any kind of logical fallacy that they can in order to just win, right? You just want to win the argument. Winning an argument doesn't mean that you are on the side of truth. It just means that you're better at using wiggle words, or you're better at shouting someone down, or you're better at using all kinds of logical fallacies. You should, if one thing that this series I haven't covered in this series is the logical fallacies, but that's something that now I'm mentioning on part 13 that you can look up some of the logical fallacies, and you'll see some of the well-known classical or classic arguments that are, there's all kinds of logical fallacies, like the fallacy of the majority is one. The fallacy of the majority goes like this: if most people do a thing, then that means that thing is whatever you want to call it. That thing is okay to do, that thing is safe, that thing is, whatever it is, right? So if you say, well, I see most people do this, then it's probably okay, right? Just because the majority believes something to be true doesn't mean it's true, right? Something is true because it's true objectively, and it can be proven so. It's not true just because most people believe it to be true, right? That's the fallacy of the majority. There's all kinds of different logical fallacies, but in your personal relationship, right? If you're arguing just to be right in your personal relationship, you're damaging the relationship. You're damaging yourself. You're damaging your partner, right? So it's more important, and you like how I snuck that in to the Bill Clinton part, right? Sneaky. You should keep in mind that instead of using these wiggle words, these logical fallacies, and these Billisms where you're trying to get yourself out of, you're trying to appear truthful, but wiggle your way out of any kind of admission, right? It's best to, if your statement isn't true, it's best to own up to that, right? But if you're having an argument, the best thing you can do is try, because really a fruitful argument is where two people work together to discover what is true. That takes some self-awareness, a level of self-awareness where you are able to accept your faults, if someone calls you on your bullshit, you raise your hand, you say, yeah, okay. Yeah, that's, I need to, right? But you don't jab at each other. You don't try to break each other down so that you can go, oh, I win, right? That's not the goal, right? The goal is to help each other reach the truth. You made a mistake, I made a mistake, whatever that is, right? But then you come to that argument, and the most power you can have in any argument is owning your own stuff, right? Don't give someone an opportunity to put it on you, and then you try to say it isn't true. That's something that you may do when you're younger, but at some point, if you're growing, if you're a seeker, you need to get out of that place. You need to put up your hand and say, yep, I know what my faults are. I know some things I did wrong. Here they are. Let me tell you about them. And on top of that, you don't want to be pointing the finger and saying, well, you, right? You statements are the absolute worst things in arguments, right? I statements, me statements, right? Best thing. You statements, your statements, that kind of stuff, worst thing, right? It takes time. But one thing that you can do, if you want to just decipher what you're being told by anyone, right, and be able to point out, not to them necessarily, because that's usually not the best idea, but at least for your own edification, you can look up the logical fallacies. Go on. It's a great exercise. Just find a list of logical fallacies online and go watch some political statements on YouTube, or go watch the news for a while with some politicians talking, and you will invariably be surprised at all of the wonderful logical fallacies that you can find. You can make a game out of it. Anyway, this has been part 13. Next week I'll have part 14 for you guys, and we're going to go even deeper into our practice